Hello, so if you remember in the last video, we were talking about if statements with multiple conditions, which basically said, if this is true and this is true, do this, otherwise do something else. Or we might have said, if this is true or this is true, do this, otherwise do something else. And the symbols that we used, the symbol that we used for and was just a shift 7, which is just a plain old and symbol, okay? And the symbol we used for or was the shift backslash, which is just that absolute value sign, that single straight line. And that's the symbol for or. Now, there are some situations where you need to use two ands or two ors, okay? And I'm going to talk about that now, and I'm going to do it by example. So first of all, I'm going to set up a couple of vectors. So I'm going to call my first vector v, and that's going to be all the numbers from -1 to 1, okay? And then I'm going to call a second vector w, and that is going to be all of the numbers from 1 to -1, so kind of v going backwards, right? So I'm just going to run to -1, okay, press enter, and I can just see those two vectors like that. So my v, you can see, is -1, 0, 1, and my w is the backwards version, the 1, 0, -1, okay? Now, what I want to do is I want to ask r, when are these two vectors less than or equal to 0? So the way which I'm going to do that is I'm first of all going to ask v less than or equal to 0. So I'm literally just typed in v less than equals 0, okay? And I'm going to open up another set of parentheses to kind of keep those two things separate. So w less than equals 0, okay? Now, if I click enter, it returns me a list of false and trues and falses. Okay, and what this is basically doing is it's going through each element and comparing and asking, are they both less than or equal to 0? So is v less than or equal to 0 and w less than or equal to 0? So what it's doing is it's looking at the first element of each vector, which is -1 for v and 1 for w, and asking, are they both less than or equal to 0? Well, v is less than or equal to 0, it's -1, but w isn't. They're not both, so therefore it's returning me false. Then it looks at the second element, and it's asking, well, is v less than or equal to 0? Yes, it is, it's 0. And is w less than or equal to 0? Yes, it is, it's 0. So it's returning me true, okay? And then it looks at the third element, and it's saying, is v less than or equal to 0? No, it's not, it's 1. But w is less than or equal to 0, but it doesn't matter, they're not both equal to 0, so it returns me false, okay? Now what happens if instead of putting one and, I change it to put two ands? Well, can you see there? It only returns me false. Now, what's going on there is it's only looking at the first element of each vector, okay? So you notice it's only looking at the first element of v, which is -1, and the first element of w, which is 1. So it's looking at those two elements and asking, are they both less than or equal to 0? No, they're not, so it's just returning me false. And then it pretends there's no other elements in there. Now, why is this useful? Well, it's useful because if I've got couple of vectors which are, say, million elements long, so it's a length of 1,000,000, okay, it's going to take forever to go through every single one and compare the two things next to each other. It's just going to take forever. You know, I may only be interested, for example, in looking at the first two elements. That gives me enough information. If the first two elements aren't sort of the condition, don't meet the condition, then I can just forget about the rest of the code. I don't have to do anything else, okay? And it saves me a lot of time. So using these two ands, I could have used two ors, as opposed to just this single and or just saves me a lot of time. It only looks at the first element because it may be a situation whereby if the first elements aren't met, then the rest of the elements don't matter anyway because the first elements aren't met. So it's just a quicker way of doing things, okay? So just use one and or one or if you want to do every single elements in the vectors, okay? If you just use two ands or two ors, you only look at the first elements of the vectors. It's just a way of speeding up the calculations which R are doing.